Okay, everyone, Hare Krishna. So first, I'd like to ask Manvantar, can you begin for us?
Don't forget to unmute.
Sri Chaitanya Adi Leela, Chapter 1, Text 84. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Sri Krishna Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, who are like the sun and moon. They have arisen simultaneously on the horizon of Goida to dissipate the darkness of ignorance and thus wonderfully bestow benediction upon all. Sri Chaitanya Adi Leela, Chapter 1, Text 85 through 86. Sri Krishna and Balaram, the personalities of Godhead, who formerly appeared in Vrindavan and were millions of times more effulgent than the sun and moon, have arisen over the eastern horizon of Goiradesh, West Bengal, being compassionate for the fallen state of the world.
Okay, you want to go on with that next one, Manvantar?
Sri Chaitanya Adi Leela, Chapter 1, Text 88 through 90. As the sun and moon drive away darkness by their appearance and reveal the nature of everything, these two brothers dissipate the darkness of ignorance, covering the living beings, and enlighten them with knowledge of the absolute truth. The darkness of ignorance is called katava, the way of cheating, which begins with religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. Text 91. Quoting Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 1, Text 2. The great scripture Srimad Bhagavatam, compiled by Mahamuni Vyasadeva from 4 original verses, describes the most elevated and kind-hearted devotees and completely rejects the cheating ways of materially motivated religiosity. It propounds the highest principle of eternal religion, which can factually mitigate the threefold miseries of a living being and award the highest benediction of full prosperity and knowledge. Those willing to hear the message of this scripture in a submissive attitude of service can at once capture the Supreme Lord in their hearts. Therefore, there is no need of any scripture other than the Srimad Bhagavatam.
So what Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is doing here is pointing out that these two brothers, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu, have advented specifically in this age of Kali and are compared to the sun and the moon. And of course, light from the sun and moon dissipate darkness in the universe. So they'll dissipate the darkness in the hearts of the living entities. And this is called Kaitava Dharma. Kaitava means cheating. So materially motivated religiosity is completely rejected in the Srimad Bhagavatam. He's quoting the Srimad Bhagavatam as one of the tools or instruments that the Lord uses to help enlighten the living beings who are in that particular darkness.
Okay. Vaishnavi, can you continue, please?
Yes. Purport. The words Mahamuni Krite indicate that Srimad Bhagavatam was compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva, who is sometimes known as Narayana Mahamuni because he is an incarnation of Narayana. Vyasadeva, therefore, is not an ordinary man but is empowered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He compiled the beautiful Bhagavatam to narrate some of the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his devotees. In Srimad Bhagavatam, a distinction between real religion and pretentious religion has been clearly made. According to this original and genuine commentation on the Vedanta Sutra, there are numerous pretentious faiths that pass as religion but neglect the real essence of religion. The real religion of a living being is his natural inborn quality, whereas pretentious religion is a form of a nescience that artificially covers a living entity's pure consciousness under certain unfavorable conditions. Real religion lies dormant when the artificial religion dominates from the mental plane. A living being can awaken this dormant religion by hearing with a pure heart.
Thank you. Before we go on, Elizabeth, I'd like you to read the next section. This is a very important comparison that Prabhupada makes between real religion, which is absolute surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, understanding that we are the servants of God. And Prabhupada is very uncompromising with this.
Before we
And
go
how
on, Sama,
subtle. Yeah.
go ahead. Before we go on, I wanted to hear Vaishnavi explain this part down here at the bottom. This is also very important and goes along with what you were just talking about. Vaishnavi,
Okay.
can you give us a
Yeah.
little enlightenment about this bottom part?
Basically, what Prabhupada is saying is that Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Karaya Udai, it's by hearing and chanting, because the dormant, all the living entities have this bhakti, which is loving propensity towards Godhead, as a dormant state. And what we have to do is, by hearing and chanting constantly, we can actually clear that covering and awaken that inside our heart.
Very
Very
nice.
beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go on, Elizabeth. That was beautiful, Vaishnavi. You put it very nicely in a nutshell. Elizabeth?
Unmute.
Purpur continued, the path of fruitive work, karma kanda, even when decorated by religious ceremonies meant to elevate one's material condition, is a cheating process because it can never enable one to gain relief from material existence and achieve the highest goal. A living entity perpetually struggles hard to rid himself of the pangs of material existence, but the path of fruitive work leads him to either temporary happiness or temporary distress in material existence. The path of culture, of knowledge, Jnana Marga, and of mystic powers, Yoga Marga, are equally hazardous, for one does not know where one will go by following these uncertain methods. An empiric philosopher in search of a spiritual knowledge, Jnani, might endeavor most laboriously for many, many birds in mental speculation, but endless and until he reaches the stage of purest quality of goodness, in other words, until he transcends the plane of material speculation, it is not possible for him to know that everything emanates from the personality of Godhead Vasudeva. His attachment to the impersonal feature of the Supreme Lord makes him unfit to rise to the transcendental stage of Vasudeva understanding. And therefore, because of his unclean state of mind, he glides down again into material existence, even after having ascended to the highest stage of liberation. This fall down takes place due to his want of a locus standi in the service of the Supreme Lord.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Celia, could you read next? And I forgot your spiritual name. Could you please remind me? Because you're still...
Okay, before we go on.
My name is Chatamai Devi Dasi, and I can't seem to get my video function to work today on the computer.
Okay, I lost half of that. What is your name again?
Chatamai?
Chatamai Devi Dasi.
Okay, don't worry. We don't need the video. We can still hear you, but my husband wants...
Before we go on, though, I just want to summarize what Srila Prabhupada is doing here. Is he's feathering out the different types of cheating religions, the Kaitava dharmas. They're actually in the Vedas. This karma kanda is a part of the Vedas whereby people can perform sacrifices with a particular fruit of material enjoyment as the result of performing that sacrifice. There's a whole science of how you can perform fruitive activities, like give donations, perform sacrifices, give in charity, dig wells, do whatever they are, with the purpose for a particular type of fruit. If you want children, or if you want to make money, or if you want to go to heaven in your next life, there are actually sciences by which you can do that. So he's pointing out that even if a person wants to get freed from material entanglement entirely, that's not going to happen if you work in such a way that you get a better material facility. You're just going to get more entangled. Secondly, the path of Gyan Marg, which, or even mystic powers, but this whole third paragraph is about the empiric philosopher in search of spiritual knowledge. Means a Gyani, a person who speculates and tries to understand the Vedas through academic approach, rather than surrendering to a spiritual master and serving him. So, although the knowledge appears to be the same, there are so many different translations of Bhagavad-Gita, for example, over the years, over the centuries. There's been many. And in the last 50, 60, 100, 200 years, there's been many in English. But how many actually made people devotees of Krishna? Only when Srila Prabhupada translated Bhagavad-Gita as it is, with the purports of bhakti inherent in those understandings, did people become devotees. So first of all, he's dismantling karma kanda, Gyan Marg, and Yoga Marg. Okay, Chaitanya, sorry.
Well, can I just say one thing? Sorry, Angel. It's not that an impersonalist doesn't have a spiritual master, because we see Shankaracharya is a representative of impersonalism. He had many disciples, and impersonalists do have spiritual masters, but they're not teaching. But in this kind of Jnana Yoga is considered to be material, because it deals with the mind. It doesn't deal with the soul and surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Just want to clarify that. That's all right. Okay, go on. Chaitanya, could you read, please?
Thank you. As far as the mystic powers of the yogis are concerned, they're also material entanglements on the path of spiritual realization. Mystic powers can make a yogi materially powerful and thus give temporary relief from the miseries of birth, death, old age, and disease, as other material sciences can also do. But such mystic powers can never be a permanent source of relief from these miseries. Therefore, according to the Bhagavat school, this path of religiosity is also a method of cheating its followers. In the Bhagavad-Gita, it is clearly defined that the most elevated and powerful mystic yogi is one who can constantly think of the Supreme Lord within his heart, engage in a loving service of the Lord. Sounds like 647.
Good. Do you know it? Can you quote it?
Oh, Radhe, I can't quote it, but I know that's the verse.
What's the basic?
What's
the basic meaning of the verse?
The basic meaning is, of all the yogis, he who constantly remembers me is the highest of all.
Right.
Looking for my Gita here.
That's wonderful.
But yes,
of all the yogis,
it's a fabulous verse. Oh, go ahead.
No, you say. Go
okay,
on.
let me see if I can open to it. I'm recalling. I've been a Hatha yoga teacher, and I taught at MIT for 13 years, and it was very difficult to find a student who had that understanding. Most people are into it for bodily and mental and sensual enhancement, but very few people. Here we go. And of all the yogis, the one with great faith, who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me. He is the most united, he is the most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. That is my opinion.
Very good.
Okay. Beautifully. So Srila Prabhupada summarizes the topic of yoga, mystic yoga, by explaining that Krishna points out what is the highest yoga, what is the perfect yoga, in that last part of the paragraph.
Okay, thank you. Midoriya, would you read the next one?
None of the above-mentioned three religious paths can deliver a person from the threefold miseries of material existence, namely, miseries caused by the body and mind, miseries caused by other living entities, and miseries caused by the demigods. The process of religion described in Srimad Bhagavatam, however, is able to give its followers permanent relief from the threefold miseries. The Bhagavatam describes the highest religious form, reinstatement of the living entity in his original position of transcendental loving service to the Supreme Lord, which is free from the infections of desires for sense gratification, fruitive work, and the culture of knowledge, with the aim of merging into the Absolute to become one with the Supreme Lord. Any process of religiosity based on sense gratification, gross or subtle, must be considered a pretentious religion because it is unable to give perpetual protection to its followers. The word projita is significant. Pra means complete, and ujita indicates rejection. Religiosity in the shape of fruitive work is directly a method of gross sense gratification, whereas the process of culturing spiritual knowledge with a view to becoming one with the Absolute is a method of subtle sense gratification. All such pretentious religiosity based on gross or subtle sense gratification is completely rejected in the process of Bhagavad Dharma, or the transcendental religion that is the eternal function of the living being.
You have something to add to that, Midoriya?
You mean a comment?
Yes. Any comments?
Yeah, the best process is to just use focus on the Bhagavatam and the meaning and the process that's given, without getting involved in fruitive work or karma kanda work, all those kind of works. The best thing is to just be a pure lover of Krishna and just serve him without any desire for result.
And why is that the
except
best?
to please him. Why is that the best? Is
yeah,
because it gives the highest pleasure to Krishna, and also gives us the highest mercy, goal. It's pleasing to Krishna, it's pleasing to the heart.
Yes, very good.
It's the nature of the soul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one point that jumped out at me that I wanted to cover here. Since we're progressing steadily through Srimad Bhagavatam, now going into the third canto, it's being stated here that the process of religion described in Srimad Bhagavatam is able to give its followers permanent relief from the threefold miseries. We are extremely entangled and enmeshed in material nature. We've been here since time immemorial in the cycle of birth and death. So it's not just a simple process to undo and gain relief and release from this entanglement. It's a tight grip. But so what's required is actually a process. It's not just reading a book once or twice and doing a few little rituals. It's a process being prescribed by the Supreme Lord himself to Brahma, and then expanded by the disciplic succession of how to extract one to actually develop that pure love and pure consciousness of serving the Supreme. So as we go along, it's important to remember these things, that we're following a step-by-step progress prescribed by the Lord. Sometimes we may want to skip around or become lazy at our attempts, but we should know that this is important to continue with perseverance.
Okay. Thank you. Tisha, would you read the next slide and the next two slides, please?
Okay, thank you, Mataji. Purport continued. Bhagavata Dharma, or the religious principle described in Srimad Bhagavatam, of which the Bhagavad-Gita is a preliminary study, is meant for liberated persons of the highest order who attribute very little value to the sense gratification of pretentious religiosity. The first and foremost concern of fruitive workers, elevationists, empiric philosophers, and salvationists is to raise their material position. But devotees of Godhead have no such selfish desires. They serve the Supreme Lord only for his satisfaction. Sri Arjuna wanted to satisfy his senses by becoming a so-called non-violent and pious man. At first decided not to fight. But when he was fully situated in the principles of Bhagavata Dharma, culminating in complete surrender unto the will of the Supreme Lord, he changed his decision and agreed to fight for the satisfaction of the Lord. It is the constitutional position of the living entity to be situated in this pure consciousness. Any so-called religious process that interferes with this unadulterated spiritual position of the living being must therefore be considered a pretentious process of religiosity. The real form of religion is spontaneous, loving service to Godhead. This relationship of the living being with the absolute personality of Godhead in service is eternal. By contact with the material nature, the living entities exhibit varied symptoms of the disease of material consciousness. To cure this material disease is the supreme object of human life. The process that treats this disease is called Bhagavat Dharma or Sanatana Dharma, real religion. This is described in the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam. Therefore, anyone who, because of his background of pious activities in previous lives, is anxious to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, immediately realizes the presence of the Supreme Lord within his heart and fulfills the mission of his life. Yes.
Yes. What do you think, Tisha?
Well,
Pretty simple, huh?
please make it be simpler. I'm fascinated with the words that Prabhupada picks. Like he uses that word pretentious so many times in this little section about other religions, like other religions that walk around and think that, or, all religions think they're the best, the only way, the one way. And so I just think it's interesting how Prabhupada says those pretentious religions actually don't take you to the supreme goal of serving Krishna. And so it makes me feel closer to Prabhupada when I look at the words he uses and try to imagine in my mind when he was writing and recording what, the message he was trying to send, how important it was for us to know those other paths, although they come out shiny and they're the best, they're not the best. They're not the going to give you the most highest place, not going to take you to the highest.
Well, also the thing that's wonderful about this philosophy, Bhagavad Dharma, is it is non-sectarian. It is the basic religion of the soul. Even within the Vedic system, which Prabhupada is referring to impersonalists, it's not only the Western world, there are impersonalists in the Vedic culture. Anything that is not directly teaching the followers to serve God and to develop love for God is actually cheating, because it's making one more bound to the material energy.
Yeah.
So
for someone like me who started like with Siddha Yoga, I started my journey with those impersonalist yogic paths, and so then when you get if somebody happens to give you a book by Prabhupada and you read these things, then something, will click in your brain that, okay, I get it. You know what I mean? So for me, it's very special.
Well, it says right here, read the Bhagavatam. Read
Yeah.
Prabhupada's words. Hearing from the pure devotee, that's the Bhagavat, and studying the Bhagavatam. So you get 2 in 1, reading Srila Prabhupada's purports on the Bhagavatam.
Yeah.
Nice package. Thank you, Tisha. Very good. Narayan, can you continue for us?
Yes. 1.95. By the grace of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityanand, this darkness of ignorance is removed and the truth is brought to light. The sun and moon dissipate the darkness of the external world and thus reveal external material objects like pots and plates. But these two brothers, Lord Nityanand and Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityanand, dissipate the darkness of the inner core of the heart, and thus they help one meet the 2 kinds of Bhagavatas, persons or things in relationship with the personality of Godhead. One of the Bhagavatas is the great scripture, Srimad Bhagavatam, and the other is the pure devotee observed in the mellows of loving devotion. Though the actions of these 2 Bhagavatas, through the actions of these 2 Bhagavatas, the Lord instills the mellows of transcendental loving service into the heart of a living being. And thus, the Lord in the heart of his devotees comes under the control of the devotee's love.
That has to do with what we were just discussing, the Bhagavatas and the book Bhagavad. Thank you, Narayan.
Thank you.
Mr. Higgins, why don't you finish the Chaitanya Charitamrita section for us? This next slide. Unmute. Marvin, are you there?
Okay, I'm here.
Okay.
CCI 1.103. Let us therefore worship the holy feet of these 2 lords. Thus, one can be rid of all difficulties on the path of self-realization. CCI 108 to 110. If one patiently hears about the glories of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sri Nityananda Prabhu, and Sri Advaita Prabhu, and their devotees' devotional activities, names, and fame, along with the mellows of their transcendental loving exchanges, one will learn the essence of the absolute truth. Therefore, I have described these in the Chaitanya Charitamrita with logic and discrimination. Praying at the lotus feet of Shri Rupa and Shri Raghunatha, always desiring their mercy, I, Krishnadasa, narrate the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, following in their footsteps. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purports to Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, first chapter, describing the spiritual masters.
Thank you. Pati, did you want to say something about this, since we're now entering the Bhagavatam after this section reading about the spiritual masters?
I especially appreciated that section that the Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, the method, the tools that they use are described here, the 2 types of Bhagavats. One of the Bhagavats is the great scripture, Srimad Bhagavatam, and the other is the pure devotee, absorbed in the mellows of loving devotion. All of us are super fortunate to have come in contact with these 2 features, these 2 instruments that the Lord himself is presenting before humanity. So I love Chaitanya Charitamrita. It was it was wonderful to read it with all of you. Now we've completed this part, and we'll come out of that kund or tank and go into now go into the Srimad Bhagavatam.
And before we begin with the Bhagavatam, let's try to understand why that section was chosen. That section, the spiritual masters, was chosen before we start the third canto. That's a very good meditation. So that should be on our minds while we continue reading the Bhagavatam. I would like to ask Premananda to please continue reading and congratulate him on becoming initiated over the past week. That was very wonderful
Yes,
to hear.
Hare
Hare Krishna. And
Thank
everyone
you.
should give him your well wishes and pray to Krishna for his further advancement.
Congratulations.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Wonderful accomplishment. Hare Krishna. Hare Rao.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Okay, come on, Premananda. Let's see what you got. You got the Bhagavatam. That's the good thing.
Yes.
So,
Okay, next slide. Okay, same questions. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 1, Text 1. Sukdev Goswami said, after renouncing his prosperous home and entering the forest, King Vidura, the great devotee, asked this question of His Grace Maitreya Rishi. Note, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments as follows regarding the phrase, asked this question of His Grace Maitreya Rishi. In the first chapter, giving up his elder brother, Vidura departs and goes on pilgrimage. There he meets Uddhava and asks questions, though he was unsteady in hearing because of separation from the Lord. Uddhava answers 2 or 3 of the questions asked by Parikshit in the 8th chapter of the 2nd canto. Sukdev, considering that the questions of Parikshit were previously asked by Vidura to Maitreya, decided to answer Parikshit's questions by first describing the introduction which gave rise to their conversation.
Premananda, sorry. We'll come back to this, but read what I did was I put in a few of the questions that Maharaj Parikshit asked. So I want you to read those in the next slide, and then we'll come back to this and it will make more sense.
Okay, sure. Sample questions from chapter 8, Srimad Bhagavatam 2:8-15 through 19. O best of the Brahmanas, please also describe how the creation of the globes throughout the universe, the 4 directions of the heavens, the sky, the planets, the stars, the mountains, the rivers, the seas, and the islands, as well as their different kinds of inhabitants, takes place. Also, please describe the inner and outer space of the universe by specific divisions, as well as the character and activities of the great souls, and also the characteristics of the different classifications of the castes and orders of social life. Please explain all the different ages in the duration of the creation, and also the duration of such ages. Also, please tell me about the different activities of the different incarnations of the Lord in different ages. Please also explain what may generally be the common religious affiliations of human society, as well as their specific occupational duties in religion, the classification of the social orders, as well as the administrative royal orders and the religious principles for one who may be in distress. Kindly explain all about the elementary principles of creation, the number of such elementary principles, their causes and their development, and also the process of devotional service and the method of mystic powers.
So let's go back now to the previous quote. This is not a purport by Srila Prabhupada. I would say that 99.999% of the devotees that read this verse, when they start the third canto, just skip over it. But it caught my attention because I'm doing a class on it, and I did a deep dive and found this explanation. So, Pritam, does it make sense to you? Can you explain what happened? What's going on here?
And let me read it
Read that
again.
again.
I want to
read it again, please.
Yes. So I'm reading the section in quotes. In the first chapter, giving up his elder brother, Vidura departs and goes on pilgrimage. There he meets Uddhava and asks questions, though he was unsteady in hearing because of separation from the Lord.
Uddhava answers 2 or 3 of the questions asked by Parikshit in the 8th chapter of the 2nd canto. Sukdev, considering that the questions of Parikshit were previously asked by Vidura to Maitreya, decided to answer Parikshit's questions by first describing the introduction, which gave rise to the conversation. So to me, it looks like these questions were answered at different times, once by Uddhava and other questions were answered by Sukdev Goswami. Because Uddhava was in deep separation from the Lord, he could not answer a lot of questions. And whatever was remaining, Sukdev Goswami picked those questions up and answered them to Parikshit Maharaj. So that's what I understood. And basically this third canto, what you're reading is basically continuation of those discussions between Sukdev Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj through the conversation between Vidura and Maitreya Rishi. Is that correct?
Yeah. Unmute, Patti. Unmute.
We know that the Srimad Bhagavatam basically, the first canto was an introduction to the cursing of Maharaj Parikshit. At the end of the first canto, he was cursed to die in 7 days. Then in the second canto, Sukadev Goswami came and he spoke the Srimad Bhagavatam. In the 8th chapter, after explaining the Virat Rupa and the Paramatma to Maharaj Parikshit, Maharaj Parikshit asked questions, wanting to know more in detail. Then they went in. Then, in order to answer those questions, he went into the conversation between Lord Brahma and Narada, his son, and then Lord Brahma's explanation of the Chaturshloki and how he was explained this information by the Supreme Lord. At the end of the second canto, Shonaka Rishi asks Sutta Goswami to go back to the explanation of why Vidura returned home, which was described earlier in the first canto in the story of Dhritarashtra and the Pandavas. So now Sukadev is reverting back to the questions Maharaj Parikshit asked in chapter 8 about the development of the universe. And he's saying these same questions that you're asking me were asked by Vidura to Maitreya. But Uddhava also answered 2 or 3 of those questions. So in order to get to those questions, he's introducing the conversation between Vidura and Uddhava first, but ultimately he's leading to the conversation between Vidura and Maitreya, which will answer those questions more in detail.
Thank you. Also, just to add to that, as I said before, keep in mind the etiquette between the disciple and the spiritual master, which is also going to come up here in relation to Vidura and Maitreya and Uddhava. Uddhava. So going on, Faye, can you please read the next couple of slides for us?
Yes, Mataji. Srimad Bhagavatam 3.1.2. What else is there to say about the residential house of the Pandavas? Sri Krishna, the Lord of everything, acted as your minister. He used to enter that house as if it were his own, and he did not take any care of Duryodhana's house. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. It is mentioned here that the Lord identified the house with his own self. Thus, the house of the Pandavas was as good as Vrindavan, and Vidura should not have given up that place of transcendental bliss. Therefore, the reason for his quitting the house was not exactly family misunderstanding. Rather, Vidura took the opportunity to meet Rishi Maitreya and discuss transcendental knowledge. For a saintly person like Vidura, any disturbance due to worldly affairs is insignificant. Excuse me. Such disturbances, however, are sometimes favorable for higher realization, and therefore Vidura took advantage of a family misunderstanding in order to meet Maitreya Rishi.
Go
Srimad
on, Faye.
Bhagavatam 3.1.3. The king asked Sukadev Goswami, Where and when did the meeting and the discussion take place between Saint Vidura and His Grace Maitreya Muni? Kindly oblige, my lord, and describe this to us. Excuse me. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Exactly as Sunaka Rishi inquired of Sutta Goswami, and Sutta Goswami replied, so Srila Sukadev Goswami replied to King Parikshit's inquiries. The king was very anxious to understand the meaningful discussion that took place between two great souls.
Okay, thank you. Why don't you do the next one? Because we have a lot more to read, and not everybody is reading today.
Srimad Bhagavatam 3.1.4. Saint Vidura was a great and pure devotee of the Lord, and therefore his questions to His Grace Rishi Maitreya must have been very purposeful, on the highest level, and approved by learned circles. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. According to Srimad Bhagavatam, one who is advised to approach a bona fide spiritual master when one is actually inclined to question from an elevated level of spiritual understanding. A common man who has no interest in spiritual values has no need to approach a spiritual master just as a matter of following fashion. As a student, Maharaja Pariksit was serious about learning the science of God, and Sukadev Goswami was a bona fide spiritual master in the transcendental service. Both of them knew that the topics discussed by Vidura and Rishi Maitreya were elevated, and thus Maharaja Pariksit was very interested in learning from the bona fide spiritual master.
Thank you. Can you comment on that a little bit, Faye?
One of the things that fascinates me about reading, the Srimad Bhagavatam is the beauty of how Sri Krishna's plans are so multi-layered. When you think of all of the underpinnings of this family misunderstanding that was mentioned earlier as one of the reasons why Vidura left, we notice that Vidura does come back at a very important point after the Battle of Kurukshetra took place. He had quite a message to deliver to his brother. So in my heart, I love watching the multiple layers of Krishna's plans, knowing how they always fit together so perfectly and beautifully, and then he has a purpose for everything he does.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Not only for the Pandavas, but for all of us as well in our own lives. Everything that we go through in Krishna consciousness is for our own advancement, specifically put there by Krishna himself. Thank you, Faye. That was wonderful. Chaitamayi, could you go on reading for us?
Yes.
Yeah, good.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Bhagavatam 3.1.6. Sri Shukdev Goswami said, King Dhritarashtra became blind under the influence of impious desires to nourish his dishonest sons. And thus he set fire to the lacquer house to burn his fatherless nephews, the Pandavas. Report. Dhritarashtra was blind from birth, but his blindness in committing impious activities to support his dishonest sons was a greater blindness than his physical lack of eyesight. The physical lack of sight does not bar one from spiritual progress. But when one is blind spiritually, even though physically fit, that blindness is dangerously detrimental to the progress of human life.
Go on.
Haribol.
Go on.
3, 1, 7, and 8. The king did not forbid his son Dushashana's abominable action of grabbing the hair of Draupadi, the wife of the godly King Yudhisthira, even though her tears washed the red dust on her breast. Yudhisthira, who was born without any enemy, was unfairly defeated in gambling. But because he had taken the vow of truthfulness, he went off to the forest. When he came back in due course and begged the return of his rightful share of the kingdom, he was refused by Dhritarashtra, who was overwhelmed by illusion. Report. Maharaj Yudhisthira was the rightful heir to his father's kingdom. But just to favor his own sons, headed by Duryodhana, Dhritarashtra, Maharaj Yudhisthira's uncle, adopted various unfair means to cheat his nephews of their rightful share of the kingdom. At last, the Pandavas demanded only 5 villages, one for each of the 5 brothers, but that was also refused by the usurpers. This incident led to the war of Kurukshetra. The battle of Kurukshetra, therefore, was induced by the Kurus and not the Pandavas. As Kshatriyas, the proper livelihood of the Pandavas was only to rule. The proper livelihood of the Pandavas was only to rule and not to accept any other occupation. A Brahmana, Kshatriya, or Vaishya will not accept employment for his livelihood under any circumstances.
Thank you. Can you comment on that, Chaita?
Yes, thank you. So, Maharaj Yudhisthira, by all accounts, was privy to taking over his father's kingdom. But this king, Dhritarashtra, is so blind that he's deciding he's going to do anything within his power just to protect his own immediate family's interest. I mean, they had so much land, and they were even the Pandavas' meager demand of 5 villages was also refused, and so it was completely out of balance, and thus the battle of Kurukshetra was justified at that point. It had to happen. It was something had to change.
And this was also Krishna's plan, wasn't it?
Yes. It's good to see, as we were just discussing, the plan that Krishna has in each one of our lives. When some things become unavoidable, we have to surrender and go with it.
That's it.
The Pandavas really didn't want to fight. They did not want to fight, but the Kurus imposed this on them, so they had to run with it. And
and this is the whole meaning of the Bhagavad-Gita. Arjuna said, "No, I cannot fight," and he dropped his bow. And Krishna had to explain for our benefit the reason why we do things that maybe we don't particularly like materially, to satisfy the plan of the Lord, because we can't see the plan of the Lord. Thank you thank you. Okay, so you're welcome. Narayan, do you think you can handle reading the next one?
Yes. Srimad Bhagavatam 3.1.9. Lord Krishna was sent by Arjuna into the assembly as the spiritual master of the whole world. And although his words were heard by some, like Brahma, as pure nectar, it was not so for the others.
Like Bhishma. like Bhishma.
Oh,
Bhishma
like
was
Bhishma.
seen.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
that's
Sorry.
an important one.
Yes. Who were completely bereft of the last farthing of past pious works. The king, Dhritarashtra or Duryodhana, did not take the words of Lord Krishna very seriously. Srimad Bhagavatam 3.1.10, 10 to 12. When Vidura was invited by his elder brother, Dhritarashtra, for consultation, he entered the house and gave instructions which were exactly to the point. His advice is well known, and instructions by Vidura are approved by expert ministers of state. You must now return the legitimate share to Yudhishthira, who has no enemies and who has been forbearing through untold suffering due to your offenses. He's waiting with your younger brothers, among whom is the revengeful Bhim, breathing heavily like a snake. Surely you are afraid of him. Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead, has accepted the sons of Partha as his kinsmen, and all the kings of the world are with Lord Krishna. He's present in his home with all his family members, the kings, the princes, and the Yadu dynasty, who have conquered an unlimited number of rulers, and he is their Lord.
These are very intense statements being made by Vidura to Dhritarashtra. Little frightening even. Manvantar, can you read the next slide?
Purport. Vidura gave Dhritarashtra very good counsel regarding political alliance with the sons of Pritha, the Pandavas. The first thing he said was that Lord Krishna was intimately related with them as their cousin. Because Lord Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead, he is worshipable by all Brahmanas and demigods, who are the controllers of the universal affairs. Besides that, Lord Krishna and his family members, the royal order of the Yadu dynasty, were the conquerors of all kings of the world. The Sastriyas used to fight the kings of various dominations and kidnap their beautiful princess daughters after conquering their relatives. This system was laudable because the Sastriyas and the princesses would be married only by the basis of the chivalry of the conquering Sastriyas. All the young princes of the Yadu dynasty married the daughters of other kings in this way, by chivalrous force, and thus they were conquerors of all the kings of the world. Vidura wanted to impress upon his elder brother that fighting with the Pandavas was fraught with many dangers because they were supported by Lord Krishna, who had conquered, even in his childhood, demons like Kamsa, Jarasandha, and the demigods like Brahma and Indra. Therefore, all their universal powers was behind the Pandavas.
Thank you, Manvantar. What do you think about that?
Wow.
What do you think?
Powerful, right?
Very powerful. You don't want to be on the opposite side from Krishna, right? Anything else? Okay. Okay, let's go on.
Oddly enough, even though they heard these instructions, even though we heard that the universal powers were against him, the nature of material desire, it's so strong that a person will act even knowing that things aren't going to go his way. It's just overwhelming how strong that pushing is sometimes. And that's one of the examples that's being revealed here. His brother was his well-wisher. Vidura was a well-wisher the whole time, and he's going to get deeper into this instruction. But first of all, his first point is that the Krishna is the Supreme Lord, and you're going against his will. You're going against his plan. So now we'll continue. Who's next, Sam?
Before we continue, real quick, is something I know I can't be the only one in the material world who sometimes I'm feeling confused, lonely, and bewildered. And then because you know the material energy is very, very subtle. We try to take shelter of it whenever we're feeling distraught. We really try to take shelter. And if I chant at that time, as soon as I say, okay, I can't, no way out, just chant, it always works because it puts me immediately on the spiritual platform. There is no shelter. And if you find a shelter in this material world that I've been missing for 50 years, please let me know, because there is, it seems to, this process is working. It gives us hope, it gives us faith. And I'm a conditioned soul. I often feel this distraught and lonely and confused and what to do. And as soon as I start to chant, then reality clicks in. It's very simple. Okay, let's go on.
That was great.
Hare Krishna.
And Mataji, I think that reality, you know, that you say that sets in is the opposite of the reality that we're seeing in the moment and feeling as the reality, right?
Right, because it's not the reality, basically.
Exactly. But, you know, in the moment that we're distraught and feeling lonely, we're feeling distraught and lonely because we're thinking that the reality that is not the reality is the reality. So we chant and then we realize, oh my gosh,
Right, exactly. We're so fortunate that we have a simple process and we have to remember, oh yeah, let me chant, see if that works. And it works. So we're very fortunate. Thank you for that, Elizabeth. Marvin, could you read the next slide, please?
Yes, Mataji.
Thank you.
Srimad Bhagavatam 3.1.13. You are maintaining a fence personified, Duryodhana, as your infallible son, but he is envious of Lord Krishna. And because you are thus maintaining a non-devotee of Krishna, you are devoid of all auspicious qualities. Relieve yourself of this ill fortune as soon as possible and do good to the whole family. Purport. After the death of his father, a son goes to offer sacrifices at the lotus feet of Vishnu, Gaia, and thus delivers the father's soul if the father has fallen. But if the son is already an enemy of Vishnu, how, in such an inimical mood, can he offer sacrifice unto Lord Vishnu's lotus feet? Lord Krishna is directly the personality of Godhead, Vishnu, and Duryodhana was inimical to him. He would therefore be unable to protect his father, Dhritarashtra, after his death. He himself was to fall down because of his faithlessness towards Vishnu. How then could he protect his father? Vidura advised Dhritarashtra to get rid of such an unworthy son as Duryodhana as soon as possible, if he was at all anxious to see to the good of his family. Dhritarashtra was wrongly maintaining such personified offense under the mistaken impression that Duryodhana was a good son, able to liberate his father.
Thank you. In the Vedic culture, this is a very important factor, that the son will offer sacrifice to relieve the father of his past sinful reactions so that he will attain liberation. But how was Dhritarashtra didn't know, he was in such illusion, he couldn't understand that his son was so sinful that he wouldn't get liberated on the basis of Duryodhana offering any kind of making any offering to Vishnu, because he was an enemy of Vishnu. It's a very big, what a tale.
Aesop, was there anything else Aesop wanted to say about that?
Yeah, tell me.
I just think it's very exciting and interesting and very applicable to today, to anytime. What is most important is to surrender at the feet of Lord Vishnu.
Yeah.
And that's
Solves
it.
all problems, makes it very easy for us, right?
Right.
Even if we don't understand, that's the difficulty. If we don't understand why are these things happening to me, why are these things happening into the world, we have to have enough faith that Krishna, who happens to be God, knows what he's doing. You know, only a devotee can have that kind of faith. Thank you.
Adibo. My pleasure.
Mataji,
Hare Krishna.
Pramudi, I have a question.
Yes.
Is this called Shraddh?
What is that?
Is this called Shraddh when the child does the ceremony after the parent has
The
passed?
Shraddha ceremony. Yeah,
Right,
the
right,
Shraddha.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
The Shraddha ceremony.
you know, I have shelter under Yaya Pataka Swami Maharaj, and he was talking a little bit about that, and there was one question, I think it was yesterday or today, and one devotee said, how can I do that? Because we're talking about the sons, you know, the childs that are like, I think it's called Pirta and Parta, or Prita and Prata, like when they're like, you know, good children in Krishna consciousness. And you know, one devotee asked, so what if it's not a child in Krishna consciousness, or what if there's no child? And he said, then the deity is your child. Yeah. And the question about this verse, and I know that we're not the body, but you know, this goes also for the mother, Mataji.
Well, the point is this, that we just read it. I think we read it in 647. If we give all our love to Krishna and serve him with our life and soul and chant his holy name and actually dedicate our essence to him, do you think he will forget us at the time of our death? Don't have to worry. These things are for people who are not Vaishnavas. You know, this is the karma kanda factor. If you dedicate your life to Krishna, there is no need to do any other. Don't dedicate your life to anyone else. You're protected on all angles of vision. You have a direct connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that pretty much covers everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is in alignment with, you know, the class, right?
Yes. Okay. So Vaishnavi, can you read the next one? Vaishnavi, you there? Where is Vaishnavi? Yes, there you are. Unmute, darling. Vaishnavi. Yeah.
While speaking thus, Vidura, whose personal character was esteemed by respectable persons, was insulted by Duryodhana, who was swollen with anger and whose lips were trembling. Duryodhana was in company with Karna, his younger brothers, and his maternal uncle Shakuni. Purport. It is said that giving good counsel to a foolish person causes the fool to become angry, just as feeding milk to a snake only increases its venomous poison. Saint Vidura was so honorable that his character was looked up to by all respectable persons. But Duryodhana was so foolish that he dared to insult Vidura. 3.115 Srimad Bhagavatam. Who asked him to come here? The son of a kept mistress. He is so crooked that he spies in the interest of the enemy against those against those on whose support he has grown up. Toss him out of the palace immediately and leave him with only his breath. Purport. When getting married, the Kshatriya kings would take on several other youngful girls along with the married princess. These girl attendants of the king were known as dasis, or attendant mistresses. By intimate association with the king, the dasis would get sons. Such sons were called dasi putras. They had no claim to a royal position, but they would get maintenance and other facilities just like princes. Vidura was the son of such a dasi, and he was thus not counted among the Kshatriyas.
Thank you, Vaishnavi. Why don't you finish it up for us, Premananda?
Okay. Purport continued. King Dhritarashtra was very affectionate toward his younger Dasiputra brother, Vidura, and Vidura was a great friend and philosophical advisor to Dhritarashtra. Duryodhana knew very well that Vidura was a great soul and well-wisher, but unfortunately he used strong words to hurt his innocent uncle. Duryodhana not only attacked Vidura's birth, but also called him an infidel because he seemed to support the cause of the Yudhishthir, whom Duryodhana considered his enemy. He desired that Vidura be immediately put out of the palace and deprived of all his possessions. If possible, he would have liked him caned until he was left with nothing but his breath. He charged that Vidura was a spy of the Pandavas because he advised King Dhritarashtra in their favor. Such is the situation of palace life and intricacies of diplomacy that even a faultless person like Vidura could be charged with something abominable and punished. Vidura was struck with wonder at such unexpected behavior from his nephew Duryodhan, and before anything actually happened, he decided to leave the palace for good. And Srimad Bhagavatam 3.1.16. Thus, being pierced by arrows through his ears and afflicted to the core of his heart, Vidura placed his bow on the door and quit his brother's palace. He was not sorry, for he considered the acts of the external energy to be supreme. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In spite of being very strongly insulted by Duryodhana's words, Vidura could see that Duryodhana, under the influence of Maya, the external energy, was making progress on the path toward his own ruination. He therefore considered the acts of the external energy to be supreme, yet he also saw how the internal energy of the Lord helped him in that particular situation. A devotee is always in a renounced temperament because the worldly attractions can never satisfy him. Vidura was never attracted by the royal palace of his brother. He was always ready to leave the place and devote himself completely to the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Now he got the opportunity by the grace of Duryodhana, and instead of being sorry at the strong words of insult, he thanked him from within because it gave him the chance to live alone in the holy place and fully engage in the devotional service of the Lord.
Thank you, Pritam. Can you add something to that? I wanted to ask also Vaishnavi what she thought of that. You two, first you answer, and then Vaishnavi.
Okay. So in the previous purport that I read about Duryodhana's behavior towards Vidura, I could see that how blind lust, anger, and greed can make one, that you don't see the good qualities in others. Because of his greed to inherit the kingdom, Duryodhana continued to insult a pure Vaishnava like Vidura. So that's all because of lust, anger, and greed, basically. And in the last verse in text 16, we see that a pure devotee considers everything as the mercy of the Lord. He tries to give up unfavorable situations and takes what is favorable. He just took this as an opportunity to kind of get rid of all these family attachments and take to the devotional service of the Lord. And that's how a pure devotee always acts. He doesn't sit and curse or blame the Lord why something bad is happening to him. He thinks of every unfavorable incident as a path towards gaining transcendental knowledge and serving the Lord. So that's how I see it. That's how we should all act.
Very good. I just heard Prabhupada was speaking. He was giving a lecture and talked about this kind of thing as purification. All these incidents, these situations that we go through in the world that are very difficult for us. He said a Vaishnava sees that as a process of purification given directly to him by the Lord. So that's wonderful. Thank you. Vaishnavi, you have something to add to that?
Association. Duryodhana actually was not able to be content with what he had because Shakuni was the instigator behind everything.
Yeah.
And actually Gandhari, who's Shakuni's, Duryodhana's mother and Shakuni's sister, she tried her level best to get rid of Shakuni from her house, but due to being polite and saying in nice ways, maybe your kingdom needs you and this and that, um, he didn't leave. And sometimes I feel like maybe being polite all the time and is not the best way.
Devotee is very straightforward. That's another, but you have to know how to deliver the line. That's what I always say. You have to know how to deliver the line so that Prabhupada was expert. He would insult people and they would laugh. Yes, yes, Swami, because he was so pure.
She was aware of what is happening in her house. I mean,
Of
women
course.
in general have that intelligence, but yeah, she somehow was not able to actually execute that.
Yeah, she was very disturbed about that, but she also had her own bout with Kunti. Kunti gave birth first, and then she pounded her stomach and gave birth after. And it's a big intrigue, but it's just, I think, one of the purposes of the Mahabharata, that demonstration of the Lord's pastimes, is to help us to understand that this material world is meant for intrigue and suffering. And if we want to stay here and take part of it, you have to get ready for that. You have to really know that it's not going to be all roses. On the other side, if you want to go back to Godhead, where everything is eternal, filled with knowledge, maybe getting there will be a difficult path laid with thorns. That's what Bhaktisiddhanta calls the path back to the spiritual world, is a path laid with thorns. But there's a peacefulness in the mind when we know, okay, I'm doing this for Krishna, I'm doing this for Krishna, and that saves us. Thank you.
There's actually an underlying theme that I found interesting coming across this renunciation of Vidura, and that's going all the way back. If you remember, in the first canto, there was descriptions of the Pandavas when Krishna wound up his pastimes. There was a description of how they, although emperor of the entire world in a palace filled with infantry and wealth, they gave up everything. They renounced it all and went to the forest. And they put Parikshit in charge of the kingdom. Then at the end of the first canto, we have Parikshit, although emperor of the world, with all the wealth and everything at his command, he's cursed to die in 7 days. So that was also another theme of renunciation. And here we have Vidura, also another renunciate. He was in the palace. He could have stayed. He could have tolerated the insult and kind of gone along with it. But no, there's a higher purpose, a higher underlying impetus, which is being described for those who can hear it and grab onto it to try and cultivate it. But it's not easy, because in this material world, we are so desirous to find something shelter. It's the nature of the jiva to find shelter, and we look for it here. But these examples show that no matter how powerful, no matter how wealthy, no matter how good things are, that there is a higher purpose. And this is what Vidura actually saw underlying these activities. And he from within, it's described that he thanked him from his heart. Yes, now I can go on pilgrimage and leave this palace where so many nonsense intrigues are going on.
One more small thing to add to that the Lord himself, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the owner and controller of everything, Ishavasyam, the great controller, when he comes as a renunciate. And he teaches renunciation. And it's what, Pati, do you know that verse? That the Lord Chaitanya is very pleased to see the renunciation of his devotees. This gives him great joy, because he knows that is helping to liberate us from this material entanglement. So,
when Lord Chaitanya gave Raghunath Das Goswami the Govardhan Shila, you remember Raghunath Das was also born in an extremely wealthy family, left home, came to Puri. At first he was taking meals with everybody. Then he started to beg at the free places for prasadam. Then he gave that up and started getting the little rice that was discarded and washing that and taking that and seeing such renunciation. It said, renunciation is the basic principle sustaining the lives of the devotees of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Seeing such renunciation, the Lord is very pleased.
Very, very wonderful. We have to have faith in that. And our attachment is it's so subtle. Maya is so good in every part of our life that when you're feeling that grief, that anxiety, it's probably due to some attachment that we have, that all we have to do is let it go.
But
Anything else? Any more questions? Oh, go ahead, Vaishnavi.
But in one sense, everyone who came to Krishna consciousness is in one sense renounced. Nirbandha Krishna Sambandhe. No, they had taken up Yukta Vairagyam. They may not be sannyasis, they may not be, okay, they are all not brahmacharis sitting in the temple, but nonetheless they are Yukta Vairagis, and that's why we are here.
Right, but the one thing we have to do is realize renunciation doesn't mean I renounce this once. It means all day. We're at the platform, the neophyte devotee is at the platform of having to check oneself constantly whether his renunciation is taking hold. What you said was absolutely right, but we have to, am I doing this for Krishna, or I'm doing it for myself in some way to puff myself up or to feed my material desires? So thank you, Vaishnavi. That's a very important point, but still we must be scrutinizing in our behavior. Otherwise, we'll be in a lamentable condition, and how we'll be the one lamenting. So, thank you, sweetie. Did you have something to say, Elizabeth? No, because okay, thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else?
No, Mataji, when you said you just have to let go, and I just repeated, you have to let go. That's what I was.
Let's do it. Let's keep doing it. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And have a wonderful Kartik. Is everybody doing nicely for Kartik and going deep into their own heart, chanting with depth and praying to Krishna that you will become self-realized? Yes, right? Everyone's doing that.
Yes.
Good. Okay, thank you. Vanchakalpatarubhascha kripa sindhu vibhacha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.